You always think you're the one choosing, the one saying yes, the one setting the tone. But what if you've just been the one easiest to choose? There's a strange kind of silence that lives inside people who've been manipulated, not loud, not dramatic, just a soft hum of self-doubt. You can't explain why you apologized first, or why you kept trying to fix something you didn't break, why you felt bad for having boundaries, why you whispered when you should have screamed. You called it kindness, you called it compromise, but somewhere something in you curled up and got small, and they never noticed, or maybe they did, and that's the part that haunts you. Because manipulation rarely comes with red flags, it comes with flowers, with patience, with promises, and then with tiny cuts you don't even feel until the bleeding begins. You forget the sound of your own no. You second-guess your own memory. And one day you look in the mirror and wonder who taught me to make myself this quiet. This isn't about blame. It's about seeing how good people get rewired. Not because they're foolish, but because they're wired for love. If that's you, this space is for you. Like and subscribe if this feels like home, and leave a comment below. What moment made you first question your own reality? Because your story deserves to be seen by eyes that won't use it against you. There's a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being surrounded, and still doubting the shape of your own thoughts. You were there. You remember what was said, how it made you feel, how your chest tightened, how your throat tried to hold in the truth. But then they told you it didn't happen, or that it didn't happen like that, or that it was your fault it felt that way. And suddenly your memory became a courtroom with you as the only witness and them as the judge. You start to replay it, again and again, trying to find a version of events where you're not too sensitive, not overreacting, not misremembering. But each time you circle back, you feel a little less sure. Not just about the moment, but about yourself. That's how gaslighting works. Not as a loud accusation, but as a slow erosion. Not a scream, but a whisper that slips into your mind and rearranges the furniture. At first it seems small, a disagreement over tone, a forgotten promise, a deflected insult. But then it grows. It grows in the quiet places when you're replaying a conversation in the shower, when you're crafting a text and deleting it 3 times when you're apologizing for how something might have been perceived. Not because it was wrong, but because you're afraid of seeming wrong. You begin to mistrust your instincts. You check your own emotions for flaws. You second-guess your memory before they even ask you to. And if you've lived this way long enough, it stops feeling like manipulation. It just starts feeling like you. Like maybe you really are hard to love, or dramatic, or unstable, or too much. You shrink to fit the story they've crafted. And in doing so, you disappear, not from the world, but from yourself. Jung would call this the dismembering of the self, when the ego under threat splits off from its center to survive the distortion. It doesn't argue, it adapts. And the parts of you that know better, they go quiet. They hide in the dark corners of your psyche like children who've been told not to speak. This is not just psychological abuse. It's a theft of reality, one moment at a time. A common phrase you'll hear when someone's being gaslit is, "Maybe I'm crazy." But that sentence is never about madness. It's about disorientation, a desperate need to reground. Because we all want one thing more than being right to belong, to be seen, to feel safe in our own perception. So when someone you love or depend on denies your truth, you don't fight them. You fight yourself. You cut away the parts of your truth that make the other person uncomfortable. You do it to keep the peace, to keep the connection, to keep the version of love that's being offered, even if it costs you your inner compass. And here's the most haunting part: gaslighting works best on the most self-aware people. Those who are already willing to examine their behavior, who already wonder if they're the problem, who don't want to hurt others, who overthink because they care. The manipulator doesn't win by overpowering you. They win by making you question your own reflection. By turning your clarity into a kaleidoscope, you ask yourself, did I really hear that? Was it as bad as it felt? Maybe I'm just being emotional. But what if you're not? What if your memory was right? What if your gut was telling the truth before your mind talked it out of you? Imagine a mirror that shows you your face, but only when no one else is watching. That's your intuition. It knows. Even when the world gaslights you, you still know. The tragedy is when you stop trusting that mirror, when you hand it to someone else and let them tell you who you are. So pause here. Ask yourself, when was the first time you began to doubt your own emotional reality? Was it a parent who said, "Don't be silly, that didn't hurt"? A partner who said, "I never said that you're imagining things"? A friend who laughed and said, "You're being dramatic again"? The seeds are usually planted early. In childhood, we're taught whether our reality is valid or negotiable. And if we're taught it's negotiable, we grow up into adults who hand it over to the next person that smiles the right way or loves us just enough. But you can take it back. Not with confrontation, not with drama, just with quiet remembering. Sit with yourself. Let your body tell you the truth your mind has been trying to reshape. Because the body never lies. Your nervous system remembers what the brain was taught to forget. And when you remember fully, even if just for a breath, you begin to come home to yourself, like a fog clearing from the mirror, like a voice returning to the throat, like a soft, steady knowing. It wasn't just in my head, it happened, and I survived. Let that be enough for now. It starts like a dream. They see you, really see you, like no one ever has. They remember the details, your favorite color, the story behind your scar, the exact way your voice tilts when you're trying not to cry. They mirror your fears and say all the things you've been waiting to hear. It feels like fate, or maybe something even more rare, safety. But it isn't love, it's a performance. One that ends the moment they believe you're hooked. This is love bombing. It's not love, it's leverage. Affection as ammunition. A rush of intimacy designed not to nourish, but to disarm. You tell yourself you're just not used to being treated well. That maybe your walls are too high. That it's okay to be swept off your feet when someone finally shows up right. But part of you, some small, still part, starts to feel breathless, not in a romantic way, but in a drowning way. Like this much closeness came too fast for your body to understand. There's no space, only intensity, only urgency, only I've never felt this way before, and you're the only one who gets me. It feels flattering until it starts to feel like pressure. You begin to notice how quickly they shift, from compliments to critiques, from adoration to accusation, from "I need you" to "Why are you pulling away?" And you wonder, was it ever real? But the harder question is this: why did it work on you? The answer is simple. Because love bombing doesn't target your ego, it targets your wounds. The parts of you that ache to be chosen. The child in you who begged to be seen. The teenager who never felt safe to be soft. The adult who learned that attention is the closest thing to affection. Alfred Adler would say, we move through life with a goal often unconscious to correct what once felt broken. If you grew up feeling invisible, Your compass will always tilt toward anyone who makes you feel seen, even if it's a trick mirror. And when someone floods you with attention, validation, and sweetness, before you've even earned comfort with yourself, you mistake it for salvation. But real love doesn't come wrapped in urgency. It doesn't arrive like a storm or a siren. It arrives like a steady light, like an open window, like quiet breath. Love bombing, by contrast, is a stage play, and you unknowingly become the prop. They need you to reflect something back, to fill their emptiness, to play the part they've written without giving you the script. And once your role is secured, once you believe this is what love should feel like, they begin to shift. Suddenly you're not enough. Suddenly you're distant. Too much. Not grateful enough. Not like how you used to be. They pull back, then reappear. Each time you feel that same rush, like air after suffocation, and in that rush you become addicted. Not to them, but to the version of you that felt worthy in their gaze. It's not a relationship, it's a loop, a trauma bond wrapped in charm. Psychologists have likened this to the intermittent reward system, the same one casinos use, the same one that keeps you scrolling on your phone. When love becomes a slot machine, your nervous system stops seeking connection and starts chasing the next high. And that's the design. Because when affection becomes inconsistent, you begin to internalize the gaps as your fault. If I just do better, it'll go back to how it was. If I fix myself, they'll love me like before. But that version, their golden glow, was never real. It was a projection, a lure. And deep down, you might know this. But when someone finally gave you what you never got as a child, how could you not want to believe? There's no shame in that. You were not naive. You were open. You were hopeful. And maybe you were tired of always being the one who gives more than receives. So you believed, as anyone would. But belief doesn't make it true. And love that rushes in, like wildfire, rarely leaves anything standing. Here's the soft truth. You deserve to be seen without being studied, loved without being flooded, held without being trapped. You don't need fireworks to feel worthy. You don't need grand gestures to be lovable. You don't need someone to choose you in order to belong. You already do, without the chase, without the game, without the love that disappears as soon as you breathe differently. So ask yourself this. What version of love were you starved of that made this feel like a feast? Was it tenderness, consistency? Being prioritized without asking? Find that answer, not to blame yourself, but to rewire the compass that keeps pointing to those who mirror your longing instead of honoring your wholeness. Because once you name the pattern, you don't need to fall for the performance again. You'll see the costume, you'll hear the script, and you'll remember, love is not a transaction. It is not earned through obedience or maintained through fear. Real love holds. It doesn't hurry. It doesn't flood you with light, only to pull the switch in the dark. It meets you where you are, and it stays. There's a kind of guilt that doesn't come from doing something wrong, but from being wrong, from existing in a way that disappoints someone else's unspoken expectations. You've felt it, that heavy silence after you said no, that sinking tightness when someone says, "After everything I've done for you," and suddenly you're not defending your choice, you're defending your right to choose. This is the guilt lever. It's not just emotional manipulation, it's narrative theft. They don't control your actions. They control the frame around your actions. You make a boundary. They call it abandonment. You ask for space. They call it rejection. You tell your truth. They call it betrayal. And slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to filter every decision through one question. Will this make them upset with me? Not, is this right for me? Not, is this honest? But will I be punished for this? That's how the guilt lever works. It doesn't scream, it sighs, it reminds, it pouts, it drops hints. It weaponizes your empathy by placing responsibility for their feelings on your shoulders. You become the emotional janitor of someone else's mess. This isn't empathy, it's enmeshment. Your self-worth becomes tangled in their approval, your clarity blurred by their disappointment. And here's the twist. They rarely tell you what they want. They just make you feel wrong for not knowing already. Because if they stated it clearly, you could say no. But if they imply it, guilt will do the rest. You start apologizing for how your needs sound, for how your voice rises for having limits at all. Even your joy feels suspect, like it might be too much, like it might upset the fragile balance of someone else's mood. Gabor Mate once said, "When the choice is between being authentic or being accepted as a child, we will choose attachment every time. And that choice follows us. As adults, we repeat the pattern. We seek acceptance by becoming versions of ourselves that won't make others uncomfortable. We silence ourselves not to keep the peace, but to avoid losing connection. The guilt lever is most effective on people who care. The emotionally attuned, the ones who grew up learning to read a room before they learned to read a book. If you were the peacemaker child, the one who sensed tension before words were even spoken, then guilt isn't a feeling, it's a language. You learned it early, and you speak it fluently. So when someone presses the guilt lever, you don't question it, you obey it. You fold yourself smaller. You explain too much. You make excuses for things that don't need explaining. You carry blame like it's the price of being loved. But guilt is not proof of wrongdoing. It's proof of conscience. And when someone uses your conscience against you, they don't need to control you directly. They just need to convince you that hurting them means you are bad. Even if your hurt was unintentional, even if your boundary was needed, even if their suffering came from your honesty, not your cruelty. This is where the trap deepens. Because once you see yourself as the villain in someone else's story, you begin to rewrite your own truth to fit that role. You rationalize, you self-correct, you try to earn back forgiveness for a crime you didn't commit. And in doing so, you become smaller, softer, more compliant, until they're comfortable again. But at what cost? A healthy relationship allows discomfort. It honors disagreement. It welcomes boundaries as signs of trust, not threats to it. Manipulation doesn't. It requires you to choose between being loved and being whole. So you sacrifice your wholeness to avoid being cast out. This is the identity trap Adler warned about. When love becomes conditional, our identity reshapes itself to stay within the bounds of what is acceptable. And eventually, you forget the shape you were before guilt started molding you. You forget that no can be an act of love, that boundaries can be invitations to real intimacy, that the people who truly care don't want you obedient, they want you real. So here's the question. When did you first learn that someone else's comfort was more important than your truth? Was it in childhood? A parent who sighed deeply every time you had a need. A sibling who made you the difficult one. A teacher who praised you only when you smiled quietly. Wherever it began, that pattern taught you to associate guilt with goodness, to believe that pleasing others was the same as being kind. But it's not. Kindness doesn't cost you your voice. Compassion doesn't erase your needs. And real love doesn't ask you to become the villain just to keep someone from falling apart. So the next time guilt rises in your chest, not because you've harmed someone, but because you've honored yourself, pause. Ask yourself, am I being punished for being honest? Am I feeling guilt, or am I being fed it? Guilt is meant to be a compass, not a leash. When it's used to control you, to shame you, to silence you, it stops being moral and starts being manipulative. And the way out isn't to explain, harder apologize more, or prove your innocence. It's to reclaim your narrative, to trust your motives, to say I can be good and still say no. I can love you and still leave this room. I can have boundaries and still be worthy of belonging. Because you are, even when they say otherwise. Even when they act wounded by your truth. Even when their sadness makes you feel cruel. You are not cruel. You are remembering who you are beneath the weight of their disappointment. Let that remembering be your quiet rebellion. They don't need to scream. They don't need to insult. They don't even need to raise their voice. All they have to do is deny. Deny that it happened. Deny that it mattered. Deny that you felt anything real. And suddenly the floor beneath your memory begins to dissolve. This is the gaslight loop. It doesn't just distort your sense of reality, it trains you to surrender it. It starts subtly. A strange look you get when you say something true. A long pause after your confession. A slight smirk that makes you question whether you're being taken seriously. Then comes the counter-narrative. That's not what I meant. You're taking it too personally. Why are you making things up again? I never said that. And maybe they didn't say it. Exactly. But you felt something. You know you did. The words may be slippery, but the impact is still in your chest. Still you doubt it, because they seem so sure, so calm, so rational. While you start to feel erratic, defensive, fragile, so you rewrite your experience. You begin to trust their memory more than your own. You start referencing their reality as the more stable one. And here's where the loop tightens. Every time you bring up an issue, they make you question whether it's even an issue. You hesitate to speak up again. You delay the conversation. You tell yourself maybe it's just me. And in that delay, they win. This isn't just denial. It's resetting the emotional timeline. It erases the weight of every interaction by pretending none of it ever carried meaning. Like stepping into a room where all the clocks run backwards. You begin to experience memory vertigo. That uneasy sensation of recalling something deeply felt and being told you imagined it. Over time, you don't just question your memory, you question your mind. You start saying things like, I don't know why this is bothering me. Maybe I'm overthinking it. I just want to move on. But that urge to move on isn't peace, it's exhaustion. Because the gaslight loop wears you down by pretending you're the one spinning. And when you break, when your voice finally cracks, when the confusion spills over into emotion, they use your breakdown as further proof that you're irrational. See, you're always like this. You twist everything. You make it impossible to talk to you. And so the loop completes. Confuse, deny, reset, repeat. Jung once wrote about the loss of the centered self. When we abandon the inner compass that tells us what's true in order to maintain outer harmony. Because we're social creatures, we crave connection more than correctness. We'd rather be wrong and loved than right and left behind. Especially if as children we were taught that love comes only when we're not too loud, too angry, too emotional, too real. And that teaching runs deep. So when someone denies your truth, your first instinct isn't to confront them. It's to silence the part of you that felt hurt, to smooth the moment, to be mature, to be above it. But there is nothing mature about denying your pain. There is nothing noble about accepting emotional manipulation as if it's a misunderstanding. Because it's not confusion, it's design. It's meant to wear you out until you stop asking what actually happened and start asking what you did wrong. And this is where the deeper danger lies. You begin to gaslight yourself. You interrupt your own thoughts. You minimize your own feelings. You invalidate your own memories before anyone else gets the chance to. This internalized gaslighting isn't weakness, it's survival. It's a strategy you developed to avoid conflict, to preserve connection, to not be the problem. But every time you do it, you drift further from your center. So here's the question. When did you first learn that your version of reality was too much? Was it the parent who never believed you? The partner who always made you feel like you were exaggerating? The friend who laughed off your hurt as sensitivity? Who taught you that your clarity was dangerous? Because someone did. And once they did, you became a perfect candidate for the gaslight loop. Not because you're weak, but because you're open, because you care deeply about fairness, because you're willing to take responsibility even when it's not yours. And that's what makes you so easy to spin. But here's what the manipulator never expects. Your memory is still yours, even if they challenge it, even if they mock it, even if they rewrite it. Your nervous system still holds the truth. The body remembers what the mind has been talked out of. That tightening in your throat, that pull in your gut, that fog behind your eyes. They're not irrational, they're alarms. Your body trying to tell you that something doesn't add up. And you can trust that, you must trust that. Because gaslighting only works when your need for external validation outweighs your internal knowing. So start small. When you feel confused, don't assume you're wrong. Pause, breathe. Ask yourself, if someone else described this to me, would I believe them? That question alone can crack the loop. Because the loop is sustained by your isolation, your doubt, your silence. But you're allowed to remember what happened, even if they disagree, even if no one backs you up, even if the proof is gone. Truth doesn't vanish just because someone refuses to hold it with you. You know what you felt, you know how it landed, you know who you became in the aftermath. And that's enough. Let it be enough. Not to fight, not to prove, but to protect your sense of self from erasure. Because you deserve to stand inside your own memory without apology. You're not just dealing with them anymore. Suddenly, someone else enters the room, someone who was never part of the original moment, but whose opinion now hovers like a shadow over everything you say. They agree with me. Even my friends think you're overreacting. Why can't you be more like them? That's triangulation. It's not a conversation anymore, it's a strategy. And you're not a person to be understood. You're a position to be outnumbered. Triangulation is the quiet art of pulling a third party into the emotional equation, not to solve anything, but to tilt the scale. It creates comparison, it breeds insecurity, it rewrites the conflict into a game you're destined to lose. You were trying to talk about a hurt, but now you're defending your right to even feel it. Instead of one voice against your lived experience, you now imagine several. It doesn't matter if those people are real or if their opinions were distorted. What matters is that you've been isolated. Because triangulation isn't about the truth, it's about control through perception. It makes you question your role, your value, your rightness, even when your pain is valid. You begin to wonder, do other people see me the way they do? Have I been blind to something? Am I really that difficult? These questions don't emerge from clarity. They emerge from a false mirror. A mirror held up not to reflect you, but to reshape you. The danger of triangulation isn't just the third person. It's the internalization of their imagined gaze. You start editing yourself based on what you think they might think. You walk into rooms with invisible critics. You hold back truths because you don't want to be too much again. You silence your intuition because you're outnumbered before you even speak. Alfred Adler believed that the deepest human need is not power, but belonging. Triangulation exploits that need. It makes you choose between connection and authenticity. And because we fear being alone, we choose connection even if it costs us our reality. The manipulator knows this. They don't need to scream. They just need to make you feel like no one would stand beside you if you ever did. So they drop names, they compare, they quote someone you've never even met. They turn your world into a popularity contest where you're always just below the line of enough. And sometimes they use real people, mutual friends, family members, co-workers. They plant seeds, they alter the narrative just enough to seem innocent. And suddenly the circle tightens. You feel watched, judged, measured. You begin to isolate yourself before anyone else can. You stop speaking up. You withdraw. You perform smallness to avoid being misunderstood again. This is how triangulation works. It makes you responsible for managing not just one relationship, but a whole network of imagined opinions. And none of them are yours. Jung would call this the inflation of the false self, when we abandon our authenticity to maintain our place within the tribe. But the cost is steep, because every time you accept triangulation, you teach your nervous system that your truth isn't enough to stand on its own. You teach your body to brace for rejection before your voice is even heard. And over time, you don't just fear abandonment, you anticipate it. So here's the question. When did you first learn that being compared to someone else meant you were failing? Was it a parent who praised your sibling more? A teacher who said, "Why can't you be more like them?" A friend group that made you compete for inclusion? Comparison is an old wound, and triangulation slices it open in the subtlest way. It doesn't yell, it whispers. Others wouldn't have reacted like you did. Most people would understand. You're the only one who sees it this way. And in those whispers, you begin to doubt your own clarity. So what's the way out? It begins with this: you don't need backup to validate your truth. You don't need a second voice to prove you were hurt. You don't need to perform normalcy to avoid being the one left out. You are allowed to stand in your experience without consensus. Because the people who triangulate aren't seeking understanding, they're seeking advantage. They don't want repair, they want leverage. And they use other people, real or imagined, to keep you off balance. The antidote is recentering. Ask yourself, what do I know to be true here? Am I changing my story because of what someone else might think? Hold your truth like a compass, not a court case. You don't have to prove anything to people who weren't there. And you don't have to shrink just because someone else got brought into the room. Because you know what happened. You know how it felt. You know what changed inside you when the comparison began. Let that knowing be your ground. Let it be your unshakable place when the voices grow louder. And remember, real connection doesn't require you to be better than someone else. It just asks you to be real. If someone can't meet you there, maybe they were never with you, only using you to win a story they already decided. So reclaim your side of it. Not through defense, not through anger, but through quiet certainty. I'm not in competition with anyone. My experience stands on its own. Let that sentence be the one that breaks the triangle. It's not the yelling that breaks you, it's the silence. The way they vanish, not physically, but emotionally. The way they shut the door without slamming it. The way their presence becomes an empty room. At first it seems like space. Time to cool down, time to breathe. But soon you realize something colder is happening. You're not being given time, you're being taught a lesson. This is the silent treatment. It's not a pause in connection, it's a weapon. An intentional absence meant to induce guilt, fear, confusion. And worst of all, compliance. Because when someone stops talking to you, your nervous system doesn't just relax, it panics. You replay the last thing you said. You apologize too soon, too much. You try to make it right before you even know what went wrong. You don't do this because you're weak. You do it because you've been trained to associate distance with danger. The inner child in you still believes that silence means rejection, that being ignored means you did something wrong. And so you chase, not out of ego, but out of survival. You shrink, you soothe, you beg for a signal that you're not losing them, even if they're the one who left the conversation. This is not communication, it's emotional control. By removing themselves, they make you responsible for restoring connection. They flip the script, making you the villain for wanting to talk at all. The message becomes clear: speak honestly, and you'll be punished with absence. So you stop speaking honestly. This is the long-term cost of the silent treatment self-abandonment. You begin to edit yourself. To avoid triggering the freeze, you soften your tone, skip your needs, censor your truth. And in doing so, you become a quieter version of yourself just to stay in the room. Zimbardo studied this in the context of social exclusion, how even subtle forms of rejection trigger the same pain circuits in the brain as physical injury. Being ignored doesn't just hurt your feelings, it literally hurts. And the manipulator knows this. They may not know the neuroscience, but they know how quickly you fold when they go quiet. They know you crave resolution, that you fear the void, that you'd rather be wrong than be left in the dark. And so they use silence as a leash. Not all silence is abuse. Sometimes we all need space, but you know the difference. Real space feels respectful. It comes with clarity, not confusion. It honors the connection while tending to the individual. Weaponized silence, on the other hand, feels like being locked out of your own life. No warning, no explanation, just the cold. And that cold gets inside you. You start feeling like a burden for even wanting to reconnect. You over-apologize. You reach out too many times. You spin until the door finally opens again, but not because the problem is resolved, only because your obedience has returned. And they act like nothing happened. No conversation, no closure, just a reset. You're so relieved to be let back in that you don't ask what it cost you. But the cost is real. Each time this happens, you lose a little more of your voice. You become hypervigilant, reading between silences, preparing for the next disappearance. You live in emotional limbo, never fully punished, never fully safe. And eventually you start doing their work for them. You silence yourself before they ever need to. So here's the question. When did you first learn that distance meant danger? Was it a parent who withdrew love when you misbehaved? A teacher who praised quiet compliance over emotional honesty? A friend who ghosted you the first time you said no? The blueprint is always older than the present pain. And if you're caught in this pattern, now know this. You're not needy for wanting resolution. You're not dramatic for needing conversation. You're not clingy for asking to be seen. You're human, and being human means needing connection that isn't wrapped in punishment. So how do you reclaim your voice when silence has been used against you? You begin by naming it. You call it what it is, a tactic. You stop chasing what was never truly lost. You stop bending yourself to fit a silence that was never about healing, only control. You remind yourself if someone truly cared, they wouldn't disappear when it's hard. They would stay, speak, try. Not because they owe you that, but because they want to hold the connection with care, not power. You don't have to scream. You don't have to beg. You don't have to over-explain. You only have to notice. When absence becomes a threat, love has already left the room, even if the body remains. So the next time you're met with that chilling silence pause, don't rush to fill it. Don't rush to fix it. Ask instead, what version of me is being demanded right now? And do I want to disappear into it again? Because love that asks you to go quiet is not love, it's fear dressed in control. And you deserve connection that doesn't make you beg for sound. They say the words, "I'm sorry," but something in you stays tense. Because even though the sounds are right, the meaning feels hollow. Like a door that opens but doesn't lead anywhere. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry you misunderstood me. I'm sorry this upset you. Not I'm sorry for what I did. Not I see how I hurt you. And that difference, it cuts deeper than silence. This is the faux apology. It's not remorse, it's redirection. A subtle way of shifting the spotlight from their behavior to your reaction. Suddenly, you're not discussing their action, you're defending your feelings about it. The apology becomes a trap, a performance, a way for them to say, "Look, I did the right thing," while making you feel unreasonable for still being hurt. You walk away from the conversation, confused, not comforted. Unsure if you were just validated or manipulated. Because you want to believe them. You want to move on. You want peace. But something doesn't feel clean. It's not just what they said, it's what they didn't say. There's no ownership, no acknowledgement, no curiosity about your pain. Just a vague gesture, a dismissive tone, a suggestion that the real issue was your sensitivity. Gabor Mate once said responsibility without shame heals. Shame without responsibility destroys. The faux apology offers neither. It bypasses both shame and responsibility and leaves you holding the mess alone. And yet you hesitate to ask for more. You don't want to seem dramatic. You don't want to push them away. You don't want to be the person who can't just let things go. So you do the emotional labor yourself. You rewrite their words into meaning. You imagine they meant well. You tell yourself maybe that's just how they apologize. But part of you still aches because you weren't looking for perfection. You were looking for presence. And presence means being witnessed in your pain, not managed out of it. Faux apologies are especially painful for people who learned early to settle for crumbs of care. If you were raised to prioritize harmony over honesty, you likely learned that close enough is better than nothing. So even when someone offers a diluted version of apology, you reach for it like someone starving reaches for salt. You don't want to seem ungrateful. You don't want to make a scene. And so you accept closure that doesn't actually close anything. But deep down you know what a real apology feels like. It feels grounded. It feels specific. It includes you, not just as a recipient of guilt, but as a human being who was impacted. Real apologies don't shrink your pain. They meet it. They sit with it. They say, "I didn't mean to hurt you, but I see that I did. I take responsibility for that. I want to understand how this landed. I care more about our connection than protecting my image." But when someone can't do that, when they turn your hurt into a performance metric, they're not apologizing. They're performing damage control. Because for some people, image is more important than intimacy. Admitting fault feels like vulnerability. And vulnerability feels like losing power. So instead of sharing their humanity, they deflect. They twist. They say the words that sound right but land wrong. And if you're someone who values communication, you'll keep trying. You'll bring it up again. You'll try to clarify. You'll walk them through your feelings like you're teaching a class on how to care. But it never lands because faux apologies aren't about resolution, they're about resistance. Resistance to accountability. Resistance to discomfort. Resistance to seeing themselves clearly. So here's the question. Why are you still trying to translate your pain into a language they refuse to speak? Is it because you believe that if you can just say it the right way, they'll finally understand? Is it because you still hold the hope that they're capable of something deeper? Or is it because you've been taught that being forgiving means accepting less? Wherever it comes from, you are allowed to want more. You are allowed to say that didn't feel like a real apology. You are allowed to say, I need accountability, not just words. You are allowed to say, I don't feel safe moving forward, unless we name what actually happened. Not to punish them, not to be difficult, but because your heart deserves clarity. You don't need dramatics, you don't need confessions, you just need to be met, fully, honestly, without pretense. And if someone can't do that, if they turn your pain into a spotlight on their own discomfort, you can let go. You can stop twisting yourself into something they'll finally understand. Because the people who care will understand. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not the first time, but they'll try, they'll stay, they'll meet you there, without scripts, without conditions, without needing to make it about them. So the next time you hear the phrase, I'm sorry you feel that way, pause. Notice the shape of that sentence. Does it open space or close it? Does it invite healing or dodge it? Trust that noticing. Because when someone truly regrets hurting you, they don't apologize for your emotions. They apologize to them. And you are allowed to wait for that kind of care. You weren't ready, but you said yes anyway. Something about the way they asked or didn't wait, or looked disappointed the moment you paused made you feel like there wasn't enough time to think. And that was the point. Manufactured urgency doesn't yell. It rushes. It corners you with a smile. It frames hesitation as failure. It pushes you forward before your body catches up. It can sound like, this opportunity won't last. If you don't decide now, I'll assume it's a no. Why do you need time? Don't you trust me? You blink and suddenly, you're agreeing to something you didn't want, or weren't sure about, or would have declined if you'd had even a moment to breathe. This is coercion disguised as momentum. It's a strategy used not just in relationships, but in sales, politics, religion, anywhere. Someone benefits from you not thinking too much. Because thought invites resistance, reflection opens questions, and questions lead to maybe, which threatens control. So they don't give you maybe, they only offer now or never. And under pressure, your nervous system obeys. In psychology, this is called amygdala hijack, when urgency triggers the brain's survival center, bypassing reason and speeding you toward the easiest escape. That escape often looks like consent, but it's not real consent, it's compliance. And once the moment passes, you're left wondering, why did I say yes? Why do I feel so uneasy? Why does this feel like a decision I didn't actually make? Because you didn't. You were led, nudged, cornered emotionally until yes felt like the only safe option. And that's not a real choice, that's a reaction. Manufactured urgency is especially effective on people who were taught to perform peace, to say yes when they meant maybe, to prioritize harmony over alignment. If you grew up being called mature for your age, or easygoing or selfless, you may not recognize how often you were praised for abandoning your pace for someone else's timeline. So now when someone pushes you to decide to give to move, you feel a subtle guilt about slowing down. Like taking time is a kind of failure. But time is what makes a decision yours. When someone insists you don't need time, what they're really saying is that they don't want to give you space to choose without them in the room. Because space makes room for your center, and control can't survive that. Manufactured urgency thrives on two ideas: scarcity and guilt. Scarcity tells you this is your one chance. Guilt tells you if you cared, you'd already know. Together they corner you into action without clarity. You walk away feeling like you missed something, like you betrayed yourself, but you can't quite explain how. That feeling is your intuition catching up after being muted, and it's worth listening to because you deserve to move at a pace where your body and mind can walk side by side, where you don't have to leave one behind just to preserve the illusion of connection. So here's the question. When did you first learn that slowing down made you unsafe? Was it a parent who rushed you into saying yes? A partner who guilted you for needing time to think? A friend who made your pause feel like rejection? Speed can feel like love when you've only known love that demands it. But real care doesn't rush. It doesn't require immediate agreement. It doesn't punish stillness. It doesn't take your hesitation personally. It holds space. It waits. It trusts that your yes is more meaningful when it's fully yours. So how do you begin to reclaim your time when someone pushes you to move faster than your truth? Start by naming it quietly internally. I'm feeling rushed right now. My body hasn't caught up with this decision. I need time to feel safe in my answer. These aren't excuses, they're boundaries. And yes, some people won't like them, especially those who benefit from your urgency. They'll call you indecisive, cold, uncommitted. But what they're really saying is, I don't want to give up the control that comes from rushing you, and that's not your responsibility. You don't have to move at someone else's pace just to prove you care. You can slow down without falling behind. You can take time without being unkind. And you can choose without being coerced. Because real choice requires space. And space requires courage. So next time you feel that familiar pressure, the ticking clock, the breathless expectation, the fear of losing something or someone, pause, even for 3 seconds, even for one slow breath. Remind yourself anything that crumbles because you needed time to think was never stable enough to hold you anyway. You are allowed to move at the speed of trust, at the pace of your own nervous system, at the rhythm of a body that has waited too long to be consulted. Let that be enough. They don't raise their voice, they raise a mirror, but only to the cracks. It's a comment, not a blow, a joke, not an insult, a glance, not a confrontation, and yet you feel it, like a bruise being touched by someone who knows exactly where it is. That's not an accident, it's strategy. This is weaponized insecurity. Not the kind that protects someone from their own pain, but the kind that uses your pain as a lever. It sounds like, you've never really been great at that. Are you sure you can handle this? You're so sensitive, why do you take things personally? Or worse, it's unspoken. A quiet withdrawal, a disappointed look, an omission that says more than words ever could. And it always lands where you're already raw. Not just because they're cruel, but because they're observant. They've watched what softens you. They've mapped what scares you. And when the balance shifts, when they feel threatened or bored or need to regain control, they reach for the one thing you're already trying to hide, your insecurity. Jung wrote about the wound that never heals, the place in us that holds not just past pain, but meaning. And the manipulator knows that if they strike there, you won't just react, you'll believe them. Because part of you already does. You've carried that doubt for years. You've tried to outrun it, outgrow it, outperform it. But when someone externalizes it, even subtly, it echoes inside you like proof. This must be true. This is why I'm not enough. This is why they'll leave. And that echo becomes the loop. They trigger the doubt. You collapse inward. They offer conditional comfort. You reach for it, trying to earn back what was lost, and they regain control. This isn't honesty. This is manipulation disguised as observation. Because the goal isn't to help you grow, it's to keep you doubting just enough to stay small. And it works best on people who are already striving, people who work harder than they need to just to feel baseline worthy. people who grew up with high expectations and low emotional validation. If that's you, you've probably mistaken criticism for intimacy. You've been taught that someone keeping you in check is a form of care, that love includes being made to feel less than. But real love doesn't diagnose you. It doesn't poke your scars. It doesn't disguise humiliation as motivation. Real love holds your insecurity with tenderness. It listens when you flinch. It learns the shape of your silence, not to exploit it, but to soften it. So here's the deeper question. What part of you are you still trying to hide, even from yourself? Is it the fear that you're not good enough, that you're hard to love, that you're only valuable when useful? Because that's the part the manipulator will find. Not because they see you clearly, but because they know where your defenses falter. They aim for that part because it's where you're most likely to betray yourself. You defend them. You downplay the sting. You laugh it off even as your chest tightens. And later alone, you sit with the echo of the wound. Not just reopened, but reinforced. That's how this tactic works. Not by causing a new injury, but by confirming the ones you already carry. So how do you take back your center when someone targets your softest places? Start here by refusing to make a home in self-doubt. When someone presses your pain and calls it truth, ask yourself, is this helpful? Is this kind? Is this something I would say to someone I love? Because if not, why is it allowed in your mind? And more importantly, why is it still allowed in your life? You are not obligated to stay close to someone just because they know your story. Knowing your past doesn't give them permission to write your future. They may have seen the parts of you that hurt. That doesn't mean they get to own them. And if they only reach for those parts when you start rising, when you take up space, speak with confidence, hold your boundary, then their love is not love. It's regulation. It's about making sure you don't grow beyond their comfort, but you're allowed to outgrow the roles that kept you safe. You're allowed to believe that being soft doesn't mean being weak, that being confident doesn't make you arrogant, that you don't have to shrink so someone else can feel big. The next time someone makes a joke at your expense or subtly reminds you of your shortcomings, pause. Ask yourself, is this said in service of connection or control? You'll feel the difference, even if you've spent years ignoring that signal. And when you feel it, name it. You don't need to confront. You don't need to fight, but you can choose to leave the moment, to say that didn't land well, to not laugh when it hurts, to protect the parts of you that are still learning to trust light. Because the parts you hide aren't liabilities, they're roots. They're where your growth begins. And anyone who sees them as leverage was never meant to be close to them. Let your tenderness be your compass. Let it lead you away from those who see your pain as a pressure point, and toward those who see it as a place to kneel gently beside. You deserve that, even if you've never had it before. Especially then, you feel it before you understand it. The way their words land wrong, just slightly off, like they're answering a question you never asked. Blaming you for feelings you didn't cause, reacting to something you never did. And still, you find yourself apologizing. You find yourself explaining. You find yourself wondering, what did I miss? This is projection. Not the kind you use in movies, but the kind you live inside when someone casts their own shadow onto you and walks away feeling lighter. It's one of the oldest defense mechanisms, a way to offload discomfort, to escape accountability, to avoid the pain of seeing oneself clearly. Instead, they make you the mirror. If they feel weak, you're too controlling. If they feel guilty, you're always judging. If they feel shame, you're the one who makes everything about you. And maybe you try to defend yourself, to clear the air, to remind them gently, kindly, that you weren't the source of this. But the more you try, the worse it gets. Because projection doesn't seek truth, it seeks distance. It's not a misunderstanding, it's a rejection of self, outsourced to someone who won't fight back. You, the one who listens deeply, the one who self-reflects, the one who always asks, maybe it really is me. And in that question, you become the perfect target. Because you'll carry it, you'll turn it over, you'll try to heal what isn't yours. Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we disown: the rage, the envy, the fear. And when we refuse to face the shadow, we don't dissolve it, we export it, usually onto the people closest to us. That's the cruelty of projection. It punishes those who love us by assigning them the burdens we refuse to carry ourselves. And if you've been on the receiving end, you know how disorienting it is. One moment you're calm, the next you're being told you're too much. One moment you're trying to help, the next you're accused of being controlling. One moment you're being yourself, the next you're defending your character. It's exhausting, and worse, it's invisible. Because projection doesn't show up as obvious cruelty, it shows up as emotional static. It distorts the signal, makes you feel cloudy, unsure, off balance, and slowly you begin to change. Not because you did something wrong, but because someone else insisted you did. So you quiet yourself, you second guess, you adapt your energy, your words, your very presence, to avoid triggering a reaction that has nothing to do with you. This is identity erosion. It's not about a single moment. It's about the cumulative weight of always being the container for someone else's chaos. And if you've lived this way long enough, you forget the original you, the one who didn't apologize for things she didn't do, the one who didn't carry blame like a badge of love, the one who didn't mistake someone else's emotion as her responsibility. Because that's what projection robs you of your center. And here's the part we rarely admit: sometimes we accept the projection. Not because we agree with it, but because it feels safer than conflict. Safer to say, maybe they're right. Safer to hold the weight than risk losing the connection. Especially if that pattern started early. If as a child you were blamed for things beyond your control, a parent's mood, a sibling's meltdown, a teacher's bad day, then your nervous system learned that safety comes from absorbing chaos. And now, as an adult, when someone flings their shadow at you, you catch it, you hold it, you even clean it up. But you don't have to. You don't have to be the mirror. You don't have to become the thing they're unwilling to see in themselves. You are allowed to let their feelings stay theirs, even if they sulk, even if they spiral, even if they say things like, "You're making me feel this way." Because here's the truth. You don't make anyone feel anything. Your actions may impact, your words may echo, but emotion, that's an inside job. And when someone assigns their emotion to you like a debt you're supposed to repay, you can pause, you can breathe, you can say internally, "This isn't mine." Not because you don't care, but because you're done being a dumping ground for unprocessed pain. So here's the question. What are you still carrying that never belonged to you? What emotion, what accusation, what identity was handed to you so many times that you started to believe it was yours? Find it, name it, lay it down. And the next time it returns, not as truth, but as projection, you don't need to argue. You don't need to correct the story. You just need to stand in your center and let the shadow pass. Because the people who are meant for you won't project onto you. They'll sit with you. They'll own their feelings. They'll say, "This is mine. I'm working on it." And in that space, real intimacy begins. Not performance, not projection, but presence. Let that be your new mirror. They never really leave, but they never fully stay. It's the in-between that keeps you waiting, the almost, the maybe, the someday. You hear it in the way they say, "I'm just not ready yet," or "Let's see where this goes," or "I care about you. I'm just going through a lot right now." And so you wait, not because you're weak, not because you don't know better, but because hope, even false hope, feels better than letting go. This is the cycle of intermittent reinforcement, a psychological pattern designed not in cruelty but in control. Because full rejection would be clear. You'd know where you stand, you'd grieve and move on. But they don't want that. They want to keep the door slightly open, just enough for you to stay near, just enough for you to doubt your instinct, just enough for you to believe that maybe next time it'll be different. This tactic doesn't look like manipulation, it looks like possibility. But that possibility comes with a cost your peace. You start measuring your worth by how close they get, by how long they stay, by how often they throw you crumbs and call it care. And when they pull away again, without warning, without explanation, you don't feel angry. You feel desperate. You try harder. You reach out. You replay every interaction, looking for what you did wrong. But it wasn't about what you did. It was about control. Because nothing keeps someone tethered like the illusion that love is just one good moment away. That's how casinos work. It's the same psychology. If the win was predictable, you'd lose interest. But when the win is rare, random, and always possible, you keep playing. The same thing happens in relationships where someone gives just enough to keep you hopeful, but never enough to make you feel safe. You become addicted to potential, to the version of them that shows up on the good days, to the feeling you get when they finally text back, to the relief that floods you when they say, "I missed you." But it doesn't last, because they don't change, they reset, and you reset with them, back into the loop, back into the wait, back into the fantasy that this time might be different. Jung might say this dynamic speaks to the wounded child within. The part of you still hoping that inconsistent love can be made consistent if you just try hard enough. Because if you grew up with parents who were emotionally unpredictable, who praised you one day and punished you the next, then your nervous system learned that love means uncertainty, that it's your job to earn affection, to interpret silence, to find meaning in absence. So as an adult, you become fluent in hope. You specialize in giving the benefit of the doubt. You tell yourself they're just scared. They need time. They've never had someone like me. And maybe all that's true, but none of it justifies your suffering. Because love should not hurt like waiting. It should not feel like a test you weren't given the rules to. It should not live in the maybe. It should arrive, stand still, and stay. False hope is cruel because it looks like warmth but leaves you cold. It sounds like care but leaves you confused. It promises the future but keeps you stuck in the past. So here's the question. What are you actually hoping for? Are you hoping they'll change? That they'll finally see your worth? That they'll wake up one day and become the version of themselves you imagined? Or are you hoping that you can finally feel like enough? If it's the second one, that feeling was never theirs to give. It's yours to return to. And if someone keeps you waiting, not because life is complex, but because they know you'll always be there when they decide you're not in love, you're in limbo. And limbo is where your life gets smaller. You stop exploring. You stop risking. You stop opening up to people who might actually stay, because part of you is still emotionally occupied by someone who won't. False hope takes up space, not just in your calendar but in your heart, and it convinces you that holding on is a form of loyalty, but it's not. Sometimes letting go is the real act of love for yourself, because you deserve clarity. You deserve someone who doesn't leave you wondering. You deserve a yes without the silence, a hand that doesn't disappear. So the next time they pull away and then drift back in and offer just enough warmth to keep you near, pause, ask yourself, is this love? Or is this longing? Is this real? Or is this a memory I've been trying to keep alive? Because the people who want to stay will stay. Not when it's convenient, not when they're lonely, not when they need something, but always. Not with perfect words or grand gestures, but with presence. So if you find yourself stuck between heartbreak and hope, remember, hope can be a tether, but it can also be a trap. You are allowed to want more than maybe. You are allowed to want love that doesn't come and go like a tide you can't predict. And you are allowed to walk away from the waiting, even if part of you still wants to believe, especially then. You finally speak up. You say what's been heavy. You name what's been hurting. And instead of being heard, you're handed a mirror, but not to see yourself, to see them. Suddenly, you're the reason they're upset. Your boundary hurt them. Your truth was too harsh. Your pain made them feel unsafe. And just like that, you're not the one who was harmed. You're the one who caused harm. This is victim flipping. It's a tactic as old as shame, a subtle shift in narrative that turns the spotlight away from the wound and onto the reaction. It doesn't require yelling, just a soft sigh, a tear at the right moment, a trembling voice that says, "I can't believe you'd say that to me." And suddenly you're comforting the very person you were trying to confront. You're apologizing for expressing pain. You're rewriting your memory to fit a version of events that doesn't make them look bad. And inside something you starts to doubt not just your feelings, but your right to have them. Because victim flipping doesn't just silence you, it moralizes your silence. It suggests that kindness means not making others uncomfortable, that compassion means always giving the benefit of the doubt, that love means swallowing your voice so someone else can feel okay. Gabor Mate has spoken often about the burden of being the good child, how when you grow up managing the emotions of others, you internalize their pain as your responsibility. That conditioning doesn't disappear. It just finds new places to repeat itself. So now as an adult, when someone flips the script and makes your truth look like cruelty, you go quiet. You rationalize. You tell yourself, maybe I was too intense. Maybe I should have waited. Maybe this is my fault. But none of that is healing. It's self-abandonment dressed up as maturity. Because here's the truth. It's not cruel to say, this hurt me. It's not selfish to say, I can't keep doing this. It's not abusive to say, I need space to feel safe. What is cruel is when someone takes those moments and turns them into proof that you are the problem. Victim flipping works best on people who are already carrying unprocessed guilt. The overthinkers, the empaths, the ones who apologize before anyone even gets upset. If that's you, you've likely learned to preempt conflict by absorbing it. You've developed a sixth sense for other people's discomfort, and you confuse keeping the peace with keeping yourself safe. So when someone claims to be hurt by your truth, you immediately move into repair mode. You forget what you were saying. You forget why you were saying it. All that matters now is their emotion, their tears, their trembling silence, and you vanish again. That's the long-term impact of this tactic. It makes you associate your voice with damage. So you censor, you hold your breath, you avoid the conversations that matter most, because somewhere along the line, you were taught that honesty equals harm. But here's what that belief leaves out. Not all hurt is harmful. Sometimes the truth does sting. But the difference lies in what happens next. In a healthy connection, pain opens a door. There's room to sit in it together, to listen, to understand. But in manipulation, pain becomes a weapon. It's used to deflect, to distract, to guilt you into silence. And the person who once felt like a partner starts to feel like a story you're not allowed to rewrite. So how do you reclaim your truth when every attempt to speak it is turned against you? You begin by holding the line. You remind yourself their reaction doesn't erase your reality. Their emotion doesn't cancel your experience. You don't need to be heartless, but you also don't need to hand over your story just because someone else finds it uncomfortable. If they cry, you can stay kind, but you don't have to backpedal. If they accuse, you can stay grounded, but you don't have to prove your intention. And if they make themselves the victim, you can stay present, but you don't have to become the villain to soothe them. Because sometimes the real harm isn't the boundary. It's what they were doing that made the boundary necessary. So ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I speak up again? Will they leave? Will they crumble? Will they make me question myself? Trace that fear back to its source. It rarely starts in adulthood. Most often, it's a younger version of you still trying to keep love by keeping quiet. But you're not that child anymore. You're allowed to speak. You're allowed to say that wasn't okay. You're allowed to ask for repair without having to carry the blame. And if they can't meet you there, if they continue to make your truth about their suffering, that's not a reflection of your cruelty. It's a reflection of their capacity. Let that be enough. You are not selfish for telling your story. You are not mean for having limits. You are not abusive for needing space to breathe. You are allowed to take up space without first shrinking to protect someone else's comfort. Because real connection isn't built on walking on eggshells. It's built on truth, even when it's messy, even when it's painful, even when it requires both people to sit in discomfort together. Let that kind of love be your new baseline, and let the rest fall away. It sounds true, because parts of it are true. That thing you said, yes, you did say it. But not like that. Not in the way they're describing, not in the order they're spinning it now. Still, your words are being used, your actions too, but twisted, framed out of context, bent just enough to make you the problem. This is truth fragmentation. It's not an outright lie. That would be too easy to spot. It's a carefully chosen sliver of reality used to distort the whole. Just enough truth to sound legitimate. Just enough lie to shift the blame. It's the most insidious kind of manipulation because it uses your own behavior as ammunition. And when you try to defend yourself, you sound defensive. You sound complicated. You sound like someone trying to change the story after the fact, because that's the trap. Fragmented truth feels credible, especially to outsiders, especially to mutual friends, especially to parts of you that are already carrying self-doubt. You start replaying every conversation, every decision. You wonder, did I say it wrong? Was I unclear? Maybe I did cause more harm than I realized. But here's the problem. Truth fragmentation doesn't seek understanding. It seeks advantage. It's not about what happened. It's about how to frame what happened so the other person wins. In court, this would be called cherry-picking evidence. In psychology, it's cognitive distortion. In relationships, it's a subtle form of gaslighting. And you don't notice it right away because the facts are technically correct. Yes, you forgot to text back, but they leave out the part where you were in the hospital. Yes, you canceled plans, but they forget to mention you just had a panic attack. Yes, you raised your voice, but only after hours of being dismissed. They present fragments. You live the whole picture. But the version of you they share doesn't match who you know yourself to be. And the more they tell it, the more it spreads. Now others start to treat you based on that distorted version. And suddenly you're not just correcting one person, You're trying to reclaim your character. You start explaining yourself in rooms where you weren't even present. You try to do damage control on narratives you never wrote, and slowly you feel yourself shrinking under the weight of your own defense. That's what truth fragmentation signals to your energy. Not through confrontation, but through confusion. You become stuck between your knowing and their version of your knowing. Between the truth you lived and the version they're repeating. And that dissonance creates shame. Because you're constantly being measured against a version of yourself you never meant to become. So you overcompensate, you become extra kind, you explain more than necessary. You anticipate their complaints before they make them. You do this not to deceive but to prove. Prove you're not what they say you are. Prove you deserve another chance. Prove you're safe to trust. But proof is a performance, and truth doesn't need to be performed. It just needs to be held. So here's the deeper question. Why do you still think you need to earn what's already true? If someone has to distort reality to make themselves feel better, why are you working so hard to stay in their story? Jung would say that the fragmented self is what emerges when we split our identity to survive being misunderstood. But you don't have to live in fragments anymore. You can reclaim the whole. That starts with remembering you are not responsible for how someone else edits your truth. You can tell your story clean. You can offer clarity, but you don't have to beg for agreement. Because people who want to know you will ask. They'll listen. They'll leave space for nuance. They won't reduce you to a single sentence, a single moment, a single mistake. And they certainly won't build their narrative on your silence. So how do you protect yourself from truth fragmentation? By staying rooted in your own remembering. By refusing to explain yourself to people who only want to be right. By saying quietly, this version of me doesn't belong to me. And letting it go. Not because it doesn't matter, but because chasing it would cost you more than it's worth. Let those who want distortion have their echo chamber. You don't need to shout into it. You can step out. You can write your own name back into your story. Not as a defense, not as a counterattack, but as a return to your clarity, to your values, to the truth you know in your bones even when the world pretends otherwise. Because your life was never meant to be reduced to half facts. You were made for whole truths, even when they're messy, even when they're complex, even when they require you to stand alone for a while before being understood. Let that be enough. Let you be enough, without needing to prove anything to anyone who only ever looked for ways to take pieces of you out of context. They don't threaten, they don't beg, they just break right in front of you. Their eyes well up, their voice shakes. They say things like, "You're all I have," or "I don't know what I'll do without you." And before you can think clearly, you're pulled back in. Not out of love, but out of care. This is the empathy hook. It doesn't trap you with fear. It traps you with feeling. It uses your goodness against you, your softness, your compassion, your lifelong instinct to stay when others are hurting. Because you don't want to be cruel. You don't want to walk away from someone in pain. You don't want to become the reason they fall apart. So you stay, even when you're the one who's been breaking. Even when you've spoken your boundary. Even when every part of you was already walking away. They reel you back with a whisper. "How can you abandon me?" And deep inside, something in you folds. Because maybe long ago, you were taught that to be good meant to stay. That to love meant to carry. That someone else's suffering was your responsibility to ease. Even if you were the one being harmed. Gabor Mate speaks of covert contracts in people-pleasers and caregivers. Unspoken agreements we make with ourselves to be needed so we won't be left. And the empathy hook knows how to find those contracts. It doesn't shout, it trembles. It appears as vulnerability, but moves like manipulation. Because the pain they show you often isn't about healing, it's about holding on. They know you can't look away from hurt. They know your heart bends before your logic can catch up. So they present their suffering not as a consequence of their behavior, but as your fault for leaving. And that subtle twist keeps you tethered. Not in joy, not in truth, but in guilt. You find yourself softening, second-guessing, reaching back out to check in. You say things like, maybe I was too harsh, I should have said it differently, I can't just leave them like this. But what you forget is you were the one being hurt. You were the one setting a boundary. You were the one asking for space so you could breathe again. And yet now you're the one doing the comforting. That's the trap. The empathy hook takes your best qualities and turns them into chains. Not by demanding, but by showing you just enough pain to make you forget your own. And here's what makes it harder. Sometimes the pain is real. They are hurting. They do feel lost. They might not have anyone else. But pain does not excuse harm. And your empathy is not a permission slip for someone to continue crossing your limits. This is the line many people struggle with, especially those raised to be emotional caregivers. The ones who were the fixers in their families, the emotional translators, the children who knew how to absorb what no one else would say out loud. For them, walking away feels like betrayal, even when staying feels like slow erosion. So here's the deeper question. What are you trying to protect when you choose someone else's pain over your own boundary? Are you protecting them, or are you protecting the version of yourself that believes being needed is the same as being loved? Because they are not the same. You can be a deeply empathetic person and still say no. You can feel someone's suffering without taking it on as yours to solve. You can want the best for them and still walk away if they continue to hurt you. That is not abandonment. That is discernment. You were not put on this earth to be someone's emotional crutch, especially if they only reach for you when they've run out of ways to control the narrative. So how do you untangle the hook when it's buried in compassion? You start by remembering that your empathy is a gift, not an obligation. You don't owe anyone a second chance just because they cried. You don't owe anyone access to your heart just because they finally said the right things. You are allowed to say, I see your pain, and I still need space. I believe you're hurting, but I can't heal you at my expense. I care, and I'm still choosing me. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you conscious. Because what the empathy hook counts on is your automatic return, your reflex to self-abandon in the face of someone else's fragility. But you're not here to prove that you're a good person by staying where you're no longer safe. Your goodness is not measured by how much suffering you can tolerate. It's measured by how tenderly you can hold your own hand when someone tries to make their pain the leash that leads you back. So next time someone cries at the exact moment you finally try to leave, pause. Ask yourself, is this pain or is this persuasion? Is this connection or is this control wrapped in sadness? And listen, not just with your ears, but with your nervous system. Because it knows, it always knows. Real vulnerability invites closeness. Manipulated vulnerability demands obedience. Let that difference guide you. You are not bad for stepping away. You are not heartless for prioritizing your peace. You are not cruel for not staying in a cycle that only feeds itself with your compassion. The people who truly love you won't need to weaponize your kindness. They'll meet it. They'll honor it. They'll never make you choose between caring for them and caring for yourself. That is what real love does. Let it be your compass the next time someone hands you their pain like a hook. You start changing, but not in the way growth feels, not expansive, not liberating, just smaller, less expressive, less opinionated, less yourself. At first it feels like adjustment, compromise, being flexible for the sake of connection. But over time you notice something strange. You don't laugh the same. You think before you speak, not because you're thoughtful, but because you're calculating what version of you they'll tolerate. This is identity hijack. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in subtle shifts, one tiny surrender at a time, until the person staring back at you feels like a character in someone else's story, and you're not sure when you stopped writing your own lines. Identity hijack is one of the deepest forms of manipulation because it doesn't control what you do. It controls who you think you are. It rewards performance, punishes authenticity, and slowly it teaches you that being loved means being curated. It starts with praise, but only for specific things. I love how chill you are. You never make things dramatic. You're not like my ex, you actually listen. And you start to notice what earns you closeness isn't your full self, it's the filtered version. So you keep giving them that version. You mute your anger. You hide your sadness. You laugh at things that don't feel funny. You nod when you want to scream. Not because you've lost your values, but because your nervous system has learned that being real might get you rejected. And if you've been through rejection before, especially in childhood, you already know how to adapt. Children of emotionally unavailable parents become masters of this. They become who they need to be to keep the connection alive, even if it means losing access to their own internal compass. So when someone starts sculpting you into a more palatable version, you comply. Not because you're weak, but because your body remembers what it felt like to be too much, too loud, too emotional, too real. And it learned to be accepted. I must first disappear. This is what Jung called persona, the mask we wear to navigate social acceptance. But when the mask fuses with the skin, we forget we're even wearing one. You start saying, I'm just easygoing, when what you really mean is I've learned not to cause waves. You say, I'm just not a confrontational person, when what you mean is I've been punished for being direct. And the worst part, they reward this version of you. They say things like, you've changed in a good way. You're so much more grounded now. I like who you are with me. But it doesn't feel like you. It feels like maintenance, like upkeep, like work. Because it is work. It takes effort to suppress truth, to anticipate moods, to avoid triggering their withdrawal, their anger, their guilt-tripping silence. And eventually, you don't just filter your behavior. You filter your identity. You lose touch with what you like, what you believe, what you need. You start answering questions by first imagining how they'll respond. And somewhere along the line, you mistake safety for sameness. But it's not safety, it's surveillance. When someone hijacks your identity, they aren't loving you, they're managing you. You become easier to be around because you've become harder to recognize. And the scariest part is they often don't even realize they're doing it. Some people are so uncomfortable with difference, so triggered by emotional complexity, so dependent on control that they sculpt every relationship into a mirror, a reflection of who they want to see, not who's actually standing in front of them. And if you don't notice it early, you risk becoming that reflection, living inside a performance you never auditioned for. So here's the question. What version of yourself have you learned to play in order to be loved? The cool one, the quiet one, the endlessly supportive one, the one who never needs much, the one who always understands. What would happen if you stopped playing? Would they still stay? Would they still care? Would they still see you? Or would their interest fade the moment you stepped back into your real skin? These are questions worth asking. because you can't be loved for who you truly are if you're always translating yourself into something more convenient. So how do you begin to reclaim what's been rewritten? You start by noticing. Notice where your voice catches, where your preferences get quiet, where your yes feels like self-betrayal. Then gently, quietly, begin telling the truth again, even if it shakes, even if it's awkward, even if they don't applaud. Because your truth isn't supposed to be received perfectly, it's supposed to be yours. And the people who can hold it without needing to edit it, those are the ones worth staying close to. You are not here to be someone's version of ideal. You are not a prop in their narrative. You are not a personality shaped by the threat of their absence. You are allowed to want more than conditional affection, more than approval in exchange for obedience, more than love that feels like acting. Let that be your new baseline. And if someone pulls away, when you stop playing the role, bless the space they leave behind. It was never made for the real you anyway. You didn't imagine it. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't dramatic. You were responding to something real even when they called it fiction. And maybe for a long time you held their story tighter than your own. You made yourself smaller so their love could fit around you. You doubted your memory so their version could survive. You gave the benefit of the doubt until there was nothing left to give. But now something is shifting. You're starting to see the patterns, not just in them but in yourself. The way your empathy became a leash. The way your silence became currency. The way your identity became a costume you wore for too long. And underneath all of that, there's you. Not broken, not beyond repair. Just waiting to be chosen by the one person you kept leaving behind yourself. So maybe that's where healing begins. Not with confrontation, not with revenge, not with fixing the past, but with a quiet, steady return to the truth you buried to make someone else feel comfortable. A return to the voice that always knew. And no, you don't have to explain it to them. You don't have to prove it was real. You don't have to be understood to reclaim what was always yours. You can simply step away from the performance and say, I remember who I am now, and I'm not going back. End of script. Drift gently, and I'll meet you in the next thought.